Hey y'all, I'm Marielle, and I'm gonna be giving the lecture on LD flowing. So what I have on the screen is an example of a flow. This is actually a PF flow that I stole from Ariel because I realized I'm really bad at throwing all my flows away, but the ideas are very similar. So we're just gonna start with the basics and then go to some LD specific stuff. So you see with the basics of flowing, it's just getting the arguments down so that you can keep track of all of them and be prepared to answer and extend arguments. So first is obviously flowing both cases. And again, important to remember with flowing is you don't want to get word for word everything that your opponent says. You just want to get the big ideas and main points. Often LD flowing will actually be a little easier because it's very common in LD for you to be emailed speech docs, which have all the evidence already in there. And then when you get speech doc, I like to flow things such as the value criterion, contention names, and then card tags and card authors and dates. These are the big ideas, and if there's another main point, make sure to jot that down. And you can do this a few different ways. One thing I like to do is split everything up to its own sheet of paper. So like a sheet of paper for the affirmative, a sheet of paper for the negative, or you can do like what Ariel did and have one sheet, one on one side, one on the other, and go inwards. Either works, just it's a question of finding what works best for you. But obviously, let's look at the flow on the screen. You see on the left is clearly one of the cases. You see it's flowed straight down with different symbols, and you can see all the main points. So if you look, you see something like C2, which indicates contention 2, then collapse. So this means that their contention 2 was about some form of collapse. I'm not sure what topic this flow is on, so I can't give great answers, but I'm guessing it's Medicaid for all, so it likely means that implementing Medicaid for all will cause a collapse of the healthcare system, something along those lines. That doesn't matter. We do LD, we get the superior topics. But you see, everything's flowed down, all the main points from the argument. So this includes all the like tag names, impacts, important numbers. All of these are going to be flowed. And then in LD specifically at the top, you'll probably have the framing debate as a value and value criterion. And sometimes at the bottom, you'll have the underview with theory arguments. If you're newer to LD, you won't be seeing these things. You'll typically just be seeing something like value, morality, value criterion, consequentialism. For example, I just write V dot dot morality, VC dot dot consequentialism. And so another thing you'll notice is then going over, still on the left side when it turns red, these are all the answers to that case that are all flowed straight down. So this gives a clear organization, and it's good. You'll see some gaps between the red. So you see Ariel clearly wasn't just flowing straight down. She's skipping around, so she's writing the answers next to the argument in the original case that there's answering. So this is very good for organization. You just don't want to be scribbling down everything they say in a straight line. Say they say first on their contention 1. You want to be flowing these arguments next to your contention 1 so you can keep it organized and know what each argument was meant to be answering. And then you see as it moves over, it starts to condense more. But again, the arguments flowed next to what they were discussing. And another thing that you will see very commonly in flows, and I strongly recommend this, is the use of arrows. So if you have an argument that's being extended, don't write it again. You can just draw an arrow, and then if they elaborate, write that elaboration. Because a very important part of flowing is getting quick hand, because it is a lot of information to jot down and you don't want to miss stuff. So for example, you'll see some common ones I use: V for value, VC for value criterion, consec for consequentialism, util for utilitarianism, C1 for contention 1, C2. If something's increasing, I draw an arrow up. If it's decreasing, I draw an arrow down. If something causes something, I'll either draw an arrow or equal signs, all sorts of things. And there is no right answer for abbreviations. It's really a question of what works best for you. And then, so those are the main flowing ideas. I would recommend finding some debate rounds online. I would start with PF rounds and then move on to LD rounds and just practice trying to flow those rounds to do some good flowing drills. I would strongly recommend that. We always recommend flowing drills. And then also another thing is a common flowing drill that we will do in debate classes is playing a song that goes at a moderate fast pace and trying to write down all the words. I know it's not the one Vestavia does, does, but I always like It's the End of the World as We Know It by REM is a really fun one to try to flow. It goes pretty fast, and try to write down as many words as you can. So that's just another flowing drill option. If you just want to jot those down for later use or pause the video right now and give one of those a try, that would be awesome. But so that's the basic flowing format, is just writing down all the arguments, all the important points, and then answers to those arguments, and keeping it condensed, organized, and in a way where you can follow what argument answers what, where the argument needs to go, which arguments were extended, which arguments still need to be answered, which arguments were dropped. So now let's get into some LD specific. And if you're confused, I know PF also released a flowing drill, so you can also go check that out. Ariel was probably a little more organized than me. But what I really want to focus on in this video is some LD specific flowing stuff, because LD is typically a more progressive type, and there's typically faster speaking and more arguments being brought up with longer speech times. There are a few tips I have. First is split your flows into multiple different sheets. What I will do is I will have a flow for my affirmative, then I flow my affirmative straight down, and then I get another sheet of paper, and if it's a more traditional neg case, that will be the page for the neg case. But say my opponent's running a counterplan and 2 disads, and they're far more progressive. I will take and use a sheet of paper for each of those. So I'll have a page for the counterplan, a page for disad 1, and a page for disad 2. And this really helps space out. You do not have to do that. This is not required at all. And I know some people just don't like to do this. They like to keep it all in one sheet. I just recommend this at the beginning because it spaces things out very easily and you don't get confused about which argument is which on your flow. So that means, for example, say you're neg and you read a counterplan and a disad. When your opponent says on the counterplan, you want to flow all their responses down on the page specific for the counterplan and then flip over to the disad. And it allows you to easily separate the 2 arguments and make sure you're answering and extending correctly for what they were answering. That's one major tip I have that's pretty unique to LD, and it just is caused by there being a larger amount of information. Second, I know sometimes a lot of people don't know to do this, but flipping your flow over. If you run out of room, don't try to write next to it in the margin and have 2 margins. That'll just make things messy. Just flip your paper over and keep flowing down that one side. Just don't forget you have flow on the other side, because that can lead to problems later in the round. But you don't want to try to condense or squish things. Use all the space you need. You have 2 sides of the sheet of paper. It's perfectly fine to flip it over. Just make sure you spread out. The rule I like to use is if it's a completely new argument, like say it's contention 1 then contention 2, I like to have at least 1 to 2 finger spaces between those 2 arguments, so you have room to expand on arguments that will be made in the rebuttal, because you never want to run out of room there either and just be stuck with, like, say this much room for the constructive and then this much room for the rebuttal, and then you're kind of stuck in a predicament where you run out of room for flowing the rebuttal and can get confused again. So it's always good to, again, space out. That comes alongside splitting to separate pieces of paper. It just allows for better organization. And then another few things with LD that are unique and flowing is the theory aspect. So if you're a first-year debater, which I'm guessing many of you will be, you won't see much theory. But if you do, it's very important to meticulously flow theory, because these are arguments that if you lose that argument, sometimes it just means you straight up lose the round. So you want to be able to specify and separate out where theory is and then flow it very clearly. So in a lot of progressive affirmative cases, like some that I read, there will be an underview, and there'll be like 5 points in the underview, and try to just number those out, like space it out and clearly label. I normally write UV for underview and then underline it and start numbering out the points in the underview. So those are just some important things, because sometimes LD constructives will have far more analytics than PF constructives and less evidence. And if it's highly analytical based, you want to be able to quickly flow these analytics and not miss anything. And that's, again, where shorthand becomes very useful. So just a few other things, just a few quick shorthand ideas, because for some of the more progressive arguments, for counterplan, just label it CP. For a dissad, just label it DA. For a critique, label it decay. For topicality, label it T. For theory, I just write out theory because you can't really call it T. That's more topicality. For framework, just write FW. And sometimes you'll hear or see these things in docs or on other people's flows. So it's also good to have a general understanding of the basic shorthands that are used commonly throughout the LD circuit. So those are the main ideas. LD flowing, it's very similar to any flowing you've probably done in the past or any PF flowing. It's just sometimes more separated out, some more shorthand and more information to get down in one speech. But again, it's more time, and often at your level, if you're in a more novice level, you'll be hitting people who are speaking slower. And if your opponent is speaking too fast and you can't understand them, you can ask for a speech doc. If you can't understand them, the likelihood is the judge can also not understand them. So if you aren't getting things down, you can always rely on the speech doc, or tell your opponent, ask and cross, or ask your judge, hey, I could not understand them. Could I possibly use time to get some clarification of arguments I missed? And if they do, that's perfectly fine. So again, flowing isn't something to stress over and debate. It's something that's used only to benefit you. The final recommendation I have before I'm going to close this out is pre-flow, pre-flow, pre-flow. So whenever you get your pairing for a round, you aren't choosing beforehand. So you'll get around 30 minutes before the round, you'll get a notification saying whether you're AF or neg. Use this time to, if you're only reading one case, pre-flow that case, write all your arguments down, write your author's name down, space it out. And if you are not sure what you're running, use that time to figure out what you're running, and then try to save some time before the round starts to pre-flow. This is just very beneficial in extensions later on, impact extensions, link extensions, and it also always helps for you to be able to drop an author's name instead of having to go back and search through your own evidence to find that author's name. Because again, that just makes you sound more credible to the judge. Overall, the goal of flowing is to just make you more organized. And if you have a flow that you can easily follow and you're using that to construct your speech, it will also make it a lot easier for the judge. So again, you'll see, and if we go back to the flow that's on the screen on the left side in the red, you'll see things numbered like 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's first response, second response, third response, fourth response. If you number all this out, if you say on their contention run, list out 3 responses and they're easily numbered on the correct place because you've been flowing, that makes the round a lot easier for the judge and a lot easier for you to be able to utilize that later in the round and not have to worry about someone maybe missing that argument. So overall, flowing is not bad. I just recommend doing some drills. So again, I'll just drop the reminders, finding a round online and trying to flow it. Trying to flow all the words to a quicker song. I use It's the End of the World as We Know It by REM. All of these are just good practice. There's never enough flowing practice. And if you still have any other questions, feel free to reach out to Tempus or go watch the other PF flowing drill that is still very much applies to this. So thanks, y'all. Dun, 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 dun.